You just got pre-approved for $480,000. The mortgage broker is congratulating you. Your real estate agent is already sending listings, and you are sitting there with a number that feels like permission, not realizing that the bank just handed you a financial grenade and called it a gift. Getting approved and being able to afford it are two completely different things, and nobody in that transaction gets paid to explain the difference. So let's talk about what the approval letter actually means, and more importantly, what it doesn't. A $500,000 home in 2026 is not a luxury. In most American cities, with a real job market, it is a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and a yard that needs work. It is a starter home in a lot of places. And the question is not whether you can get a bank to hand you the keys. The question is whether your actual life, your real take-home pay, your car payment, your groceries, your student loans can survive what comes with those keys every single month for the next 30 years. Here is where I want to start, and this is the part that almost nobody talks about first. Where did this price even come from? Because we did not always live here. In 1995, the median American home sold for $114,600. That same house, adjusted purely for inflation, should cost around $241,000 today. But it doesn't. According to the National Association of Realtors, the median existing home is now selling for close to $430,000. That gap between what inflation says a house should cost and what it actually costs, that is not a market anomaly. That is a 30-year structural shift that has never corrected. Home prices since 1985 have risen more than 415%, according to data tracked by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Median household income over the same period, up about 255%. The math has been drifting in the wrong direction for longer than most first-time buyers have been alive.
So when you feel like you are failing at something your parents did easily, you are not wrong. The math was easier for them, not because they were better with money, because the ratio was different. Now let's run the actual numbers on your $500,000 house. The first thing people think about is the down payment. The standard is 20%. That's $100,000 in cash you need to have sitting somewhere before you can even avoid paying private mortgage insurance. PMI is what the bank charges you when you put less than 20% down. It's basically a monthly fee you pay to compensate the bank for the risk of you not having enough skin in the game. It is not interest. It's not building equity. It is just money that disappears every month into the bank's pocket until you've paid enough of the loan down. On a $500,000 home with 10% down, PMI will run you somewhere between $200 and $400 a month. Great deal. But let's back up, because most people don't have $100,000 in cash. The median American savings account holds about $8,000. If you earn the median household income, which the Census Bureau pegged at $83,730 in 2024, and you are saving aggressively, putting away 10% of your gross income every year, you are saving roughly $8,400 a year. It would take you about 12 years to save the full 20% down payment, and that assumes home prices stay exactly where they are right now, which they have shown no interest in doing. So most buyers don't put down 20%, they put down 10 or sometimes 5. That means you are borrowing $450,000 or more. At today's mortgage rates, the 30-year fixed was sitting around 6.4% as of late March 2026, according to Freddie Mac. Your principal and interest payment on a $450,000 loan is approximately $2,820 a month. That's just the loan. That's not your house yet. Add property taxes. Depending on where you live, and a $500,000 home is not going to be in a rural county with a soft tax rate, you're looking at somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 a year, which works out to $330 to $660 a month. Add homeowners insurance, which is averaging between $250 and $350 a month on a home of this value. Add PMI if you're not at 20% down, which we said is another $200 to $400 a month. And then
Add maintenance,
The standard rule of thumb used by financial planners is 1% of your home's value per year for upkeep. On a $500,000 house, that's $5,000 a year, or about $417 a month. That's for the broken furnace and the roof and the water heater that will all, at some point, stop working at the worst possible moment, because that's what houses do. When you add all of that up, the mortgage, taxes, insurance, PMI, and maintenance, you are looking at a total monthly housing cost of somewhere around $4,200 to $4,600. Let's call it $4,400 in the middle. That is your number. That is what the bank never puts in the approval letter. Now here's the income question. The standard rule that lenders use is called the 28% rule. It says your housing payment should not exceed 28% of your gross monthly income. Your gross income is what you make before taxes, before health insurance, before any of that. If $4,400 is supposed to be 28% of your gross, you need to be earning about $188,000 a year before taxes to be safe. Not comfortable, safe by the bank's own definition of the ratio they use. There's a second rule called the 43% DTI, total debt to income, which says all your monthly debt payments combined, including the mortgage, should not exceed 43% of gross income. If you have a car payment and student loans and a credit card, that threshold gets eaten up fast. Under this rule, you need a gross income of around $150,000 to stay within the lines. So who actually earns $150,000 or more? According to the latest Census Bureau data, roughly 1 in 3 American families does. That sounds better than you might expect. Until you remember that a $500,000 home is not the median home price in America, it is the price of a home in a market where actual jobs exist. And in those markets, the competition for that home is not just you. It is everyone who's been waiting out the same rate environment, the same inventory shortage, and the same years of saving. Let me make this real with someone specific. Marcus is 34. He's a physical therapist in Raleigh, North Carolina. He makes $92,000 a year. He's been responsible. He has a modest car payment on a 3-year-old Honda, $380 a month. He's got $340 in student loan payments from his graduate degree. He and his partner Diana, who works in marketing and earns $74,000, are looking at houses together. Combined household income, $166,000. They feel like they are in a good spot. The approval letter says $520,000. Let's check the math. On a $500,000 house with 10% down, they've been saving for 4 years and have $52,000. Their monthly mortgage payment is about $2,820. Property taxes in their target suburb, roughly $480 a month. Insurance, $310. PMI, because they're under 20% down, $290. Maintenance reserve, $417. That's $4,317 in housing costs alone. Now add the rest of their life. 2 car payments, $680 combined. Student loans, $520. Health insurance through Diana's employer comes out to $640 a month for both of them. Groceries for 2 people, $700. Utilities, $380. Gas, $260. That's another $3,180 in monthly expenses. Their combined gross income is $166,000. After federal and state taxes, their actual take-home is around $10,400 a month. Subtract $4,317 in housing, subtract $3,180 in other fixed expenses, they are left with $2,900 a month for everything else. Clothes, dinners out, Marcus's gym membership, Diana's work trips, birthday presents, the occasional vacation, and this is the part people forget. Any financial emergency, a transmission, a sick parent, a layoff, a medical bill that the insurance covered 80% of. They will survive. They will not thrive. And that's at $166,000 combined income. Marcus and Diana are doing better than most people in this country. The Census Bureau puts median household income at $83,730, meaning Marcus and Diana earn twice the median. And they're stretched. What does that tell you about the household earning $83,000, or $90,000, or even $110,000?
Here is what this conversation almost never includes: the psychological weight of owning a home you cannot comfortably afford. Being house poor is not a technical designation. It is a state of mind. It is watching your checking account on the first of the month and feeling the number shrink before you've bought anything. It is saying no to the weekend trip. It is skipping the dentist because the timing is bad. It is having a furnace go out in February and spending 3 days debating whether you charge it or wipe out the last of your emergency fund. It is the low-grade financial anxiety that does not show up in a mortgage calculator but lives in the background of your entire life. And here's the thing. The system around you will not warn you about any of this. Not one person in the transaction benefits from you pausing. Your real estate agent earns a commission that is a percentage of the sale price. The mortgage broker earns their fee when the loan closes. The seller has no interest in your financial future. Everyone is aligned toward yes, close, sign. Nobody gets paid to say, have you actually run this math all the way through? The honest question is not whether you can get approved, it is whether the version of your life on the other side of that closing is actually better than the version you have now. And sometimes it is not. Now, I want to address the objection that I know is already forming. Home prices always go up. You are building equity. Renting is throwing money away. Let's take those one at a time. Home prices do, on a long enough timeline, generally appreciate, but they do not always go up. They dropped significantly in 2008 and took years to recover in some markets. And more importantly, appreciation only helps you if you hold the home long enough to realize it, if you don't get hit by a job change that forces a sale at the wrong moment, and if the costs of ownership between purchase and sale don't eat up the gain. A home that appreciates 3% a year sounds great until you realize you spent 1% a year on maintenance, paid PMI for 5 years, and paid a 6% commission to sell it.
Renting is not throwing money away. You are paying for housing. That is not waste. That is exchanging money for a place to live, which is what the homeowner is doing too, just with different line items. The renter who invests the difference between what they would pay on a mortgage and what they pay in rent in a diversified index fund steadily over a decade has a real argument that they built comparable or greater wealth than the house-poor buyer who could not afford to save anything else. I am not telling you not to buy. I am telling you to buy when the math actually works, not when the approval letter says you cleared the minimum bar. The minimum bar is set by the bank. The bank does not care whether you eat dinner at home every night for the next 15 years because the mortgage ate your budget. The bank cares about one thing, and it is whether you make the payment. So what does actually working look like? Roughly speaking, to buy a $500,000 home without feeling the walls close in, you need a household income of at least $150,000, preferably closer to $175,000 or above, a down payment of at least 20%, that's $100,000, to eliminate PMI and reduce the loan, minimal other debt, a 6-month emergency fund sitting separately from the down payment, which is another $25,000 to $30,000 on top of the $100,000. You're talking about being solidly in the top quarter of American earners, with significant liquid savings before this purchase makes mathematical sense. According to the National Association of Home Builders, roughly 75% of American households cannot afford the median-priced new home in 2025. Not because those people are bad with money, because the income threshold for comfortable homeownership has migrated past where most of the country actually lives. That is not a personal failure. It is a structural reality. And no amount of hustle, budgeting apps, or avocado toast jokes changes the underlying ratio. Home prices rose more than 400% since 1985, while incomes rose about 255%. That gap does not close by wanting it to. Here is what I want you to do before you make this decision. Not what the bank tells you to do, not what your parents tell you to do because they bought their house in 1994 for
$160,000 and it is now worth $480,000. Run the full number, not just the mortgage payment, all of it. Taxes, insurance, PMI if you're under 20%, maintenance, and then every other recurring expense in your actual life. Lay it out against your actual take-home pay, not your gross income, what actually lands in your bank account after the government takes its share. Then see what is left.
If what is left covers the rest of your life with room to save and breathe, you're probably ready. If what is left requires you to live perfectly, with no emergencies, no changes, no bad months, you're not buying a house. You're buying a very expensive reason to lie awake at 2 in the morning. The approval letter is not the answer. It is the opening of a question. The question is, what does my life actually look like on the other side? Answer that honestly, then decide.